So I'm going to repeat a lot of the things that Charity said. And it's true that I have the buzzwordiest title. So I want to start by saying that if you're here because you love Lambda, you're here for the wrong reason. Like if you love functions as a service and that's the reason that you've come today, that's the wrong reason to be here. I love Lambda, like Lambda is great, and I use it all the time, but that's not the reason that I'm here. Because functions aren't the point, right? They're great, they allow us to scale transparently, they manage the OS for us, the runtime, they are a natural fit for event-driven architectures, which are great. And these are all fantastic, but functions themselves end up being a small part of the overall infrastructure in a fully serverless application. What goes in your functions is your business logic, and it exists kind of just as the glue between managed services that do the heavy lifting that makes up the bulk of any application. But managed services are not the point. They're great, again, and we're fortunate to have such a wide range of managed services to choose from now, right? You get databases, you get identity and access management, which, by the way, of all the systems that I don't want to own, auth is number one. We get analytics, we get machine learning, we get message queues of all sorts of patterns, we get content delivery. All these are great, and they provide the functionality that you need with less hassle. You're not patching the servers that they run on. You're not managing the auto-scaling to make sure that you can handle your traffic while not having too much capacity that's sitting idle. So this lowers your operational burden significantly. Also not the point. It's great to know that you can apply fewer resources to the operations of your systems to keep them healthy, right? And that's not necessarily individual people, but parts of people, if your people are on call, if your developers are on call. And it's also great and sort of underrated that the operational complexity for serverless scales mostly with the number and complexity of features that you're shipping and not with your traffic volume. That saves you money, also not the point. So sometimes all that the business has asked you to do, all that you're tasked with, is cost reduction. And serverless can help you do that. But in general, your cloud bill is not the point. First of all, it's one part of your overall cloud cost. One of the big things is, right, the amount of operational resources that you put towards running your system is often in a trade-off with the actual bill from your cloud provider. And if they're not coming out of the same budget, it's very easy for your organization to make the wrong trade-offs there. But you also have your non-recurring engineering, your development costs, and then your ongoing maintenance costs. But none of these are the point because technology itself is not the point. Right? The reason that we're doing this, any of this, as Charity said, is in service of some business goal. Right? The business value that your organization is trying to create is the point. And even if what you're selling is literally technology, the value may still not be that technology, right? There's an old adage that people don't buy drills, they buy holes, right? The user need is, I want a hole in my wall. And a drill is a means to an end to achieve that. But you could also hire someone to do it for you, right? At iRobot, we don't sell robots. We don't even sell vacuums. We sell clean homes. Right? The purpose of a Roomba is to give you time back in your day to do the things that matters to you. And so if technology is the point, we're here because of focus, right? The point of serverless is that it gives you time back in your day to do the things your business cares about. So how do functions help with that, right? They let you write code that closely conforms, is only a bit more than the business logic you're trying to implement. And you don't spend time coding the underlying infrastructure that allows you to deliver that. Managed services let you focus on your functions, right? Observability is helpful because it allows you to understand more things like mean time between failures, mean time to resolution, that are measures of how often your customers are not getting value. And this is where, again, that service level objective point of 100% uptime should not be your goal, is because that's going to start at a certain point. you cease to be providing new value to your customers and start focusing just on the technology. Spending less on the cloud and having fewer operations resources that you need to apply is freeing up your organization to apply that to the creation of new value for your customers. So focus is the why of serverless. You should be here because you want to focus on creating value. And you're charged with applying technology in the creation of value. So going back to cost, Lyft's AWS bill was in the news. It's $100 million per year. And a lot of people were like, wow, that's really high. And a bunch of people were like, yeah, I could do better. First of all, no, you couldn't. But that's beside the point. Would Lyft's bill be lower if they went 100% serverless? Right, they're already using things like DynamoDB, but they could replace, they have a heavily containerized infrastructure. If they replaced all of that with Lambda, would they spend less? Almost certainly. Would it let them focus on delivering value to their customers? Yes. But in between now and then, what would happen? While they're spending time on re-architecting their system, they would lose focus, right? And they're at a stage in their journey where that's not acceptable. Right now, mature public companies, part of the business value that they deliver is to their shareholders as well as to their customers. And at that point, cost reduction can provide value directly, and so may be a goal. But for Lyft right now, focusing on growth is more important than cost reduction. And so by not going serverless, by not trying to integrate these technologies or re-architect to bring those technologies, they're making the serverless choice. And so what I'm telling you is that serverless has never been about the technology that we call serverless. That's where the term came from. So what does it have to do with it? And so I'm going to take a slight detour and come back to that and talk about the small part of what you do that is the value to your customers. So when you're delivering a product, between you and your competitors, you're all usually selling boxes that are all roughly the same. It's unusual to be in a situation where all the products are radically different from each other, or that your product is like radically better than anybody else's. So why would a customer choose you over your competitors? Well, so unfortunately, most of your product is table stakes. What's needed just to play, right? Table stakes are awful because you can't win points on them. You can only lose points. If you have a mobile app, you need a settings page. No one's going to choose your app because your settings page is amazing. They will not use your app if your settings page is terrible. And so focusing on doing that, 20% better than your competitors is time wasted. The worst part is that table stakes are most of any given product. Like, there's just so many things that you need to deliver just as a baseline, but somewhere in there is the value that makes you different, right? What is your differentiator, and why do your customers care about that? And so identifying that, right, is the subject of many much longer talks than mine. So I won't go into that because that's also not my specialty. But even this is only the product that the user is actually seeing, right? Underneath that is a huge amount of more stuff in order just to deliver the product in the first place, right? Technology-wise, you need source control. You need build infrastructure. You might need web serving. You need licenses for your third-party technology. And never forget that your delivery of technology is predicated on a host of corporate functions that serve you, like facilities, like payroll, all of those things, right, are necessary to get the product out the door, but aren't part of that value up in the corner. And that's the only thing that really matters. Everything else is, in some sense, a distraction from that. So what do? You get someone else to do all those other things, right? This is already part of your organization. When you break out a smaller team, the purpose of doing that is that they are all focused on the same thing, so the entire team can be aligned, and therefore have a better boundary between what they're delivering and things from outside the team that they can rely on, either elsewhere in the organization or from outside, from a third party. Okay, So how do I turn this back in around to the technology? So it's really a consequence of focusing on the business value, right? So by analogy, right, when we have traditionally had separated dev and ops teams, it's because we've thought of them as having different focuses. And that was because we were focused on the technology that they were using, right? Developers created and used technology that was different from people in operations. But when you start to shift that around and you say, no, what we want the focus to be on is the value, you see that they're aligned in the pursuit of that value. And so you put them on the same team and even make them the same people. So when we take this notion of focusing on business value and we take it to its logical conclusion, so we say, how do we keep that focus as tight as possible? That's when we get the technology we call serverless, right? We say, all right, well, the only thing I actually want to apply real work to is that value, and everything else I want to bring in a managed service for. So your code goes in functions so that the things that they run on don't matter to you. Your functions are stateless, and so when they need state, you need a database, so you get that as a service. And when you choose a database as a service, you're choosing it based on how well it lets you focus, right? DynamoDB is great, but if I'm choosing DynamoDB and I have highly relational data that I have to sort of correlate across a bunch of different items, I might be better off choosing Aurora for that purpose because the overall cost of doing that is going to be lower, even though I've got slightly more operations for it, and the mismatch with using it in Lambda is a little higher. So these can even be user-facing, right? When you use social login, the purpose there is to outsource your identity and your authentication. Now, for everything that's outside of your control, you still own that, right, to your users, right? You're still accountable if they go down. Your users don't care if you're down because of a third party's fault. And this is always going to be uncomfortable, but it's worth it. And accepting that you don't fully own your own destiny is important as part of this process. As I mentioned earlier, right, you can't win points on these things, right? But you can lose points. And so you do need to be able to identify what bad looks like. And so with that, you can make sure that you can recognize that something will deliver a quality user experience. Now, just a side note on this piece, the notion of having a deep expertise in this focus area and a broad understanding of sort of the related adjacent space is exactly analogous to the concept of T-shaped skills for people, but applied to organizations and teams. Right? It's the same notion. So in this way, serverless is a trait. Serverlessness is a trait. It's a trait of companies. A company is serverless if it decides that it doesn't want to own any technology that isn't core to delivering its business value. Most companies, very, very few companies are really, truly, fully serverless. But within a company, you can still have parts of the organization that are serverless. If your team decides that it's going to focus on the value that it's delivering and anything else, they will try as hard as they can to rely on another team inside the organization or outside if possible, that team is going serverless, right? And you can't always choose outside technology. You may have constraints that don't let you do that. And that's okay. Constraints always exist, and you can still make the best choice given them. So when Amazon.com uses Lambda, that's serverless, even though in some sense it's on-prem. Right? So what if, though, you're here today and it's just you? You work in an organization that is not bought into any of this, and you're really excited. You wish you could use Lambda. You wish you could use serverless technology, but the rules in your organization don't let you. What if you are patching servers for a team that serves a team that serves a team that delivers user-facing content, that you're very far away from that value? So this is where my talk turns into a little bit of like a motivational speech, because I want to convince you that you can go serverless today in any situation. Because serverless is a direction, it's not a destination. Right? I used to talk about serverless as a spectrum because I knew there wasn't a bright line separating serverless technology from non-serverless technology. I mean, there's almost never a bright line separating a grouping of anything from things outside that group. So it's a pretty safe assumption. But, so looking at Kinesis is serverless, even though you have to manage shards. But SQS is more serverless because you don't have to. With RDS, you have to manage, you don't have to manage or patch the instances that they're on, so that's serverless. But you still have to manage the type of instances it runs on and often the number. So that's somewhere on, all of these are various shades of serverless. But what I recently came to realize is one of the problems with that is that it doesn't imply movement. So sure, you choose a technology that's on the serverless spectrum. And the danger is that then you feel that you've checked the serverless box and you don't really need to move further. And I don't want people to be comfortable like that. I want them to always be pushing forward. So I start to think of serverless as a ladder. You're climbing to some nirvana where you get to deliver pure business value with no overhead. But every rung on the ladder is a valid serverless step. If you move from on-prem to the public cloud, that's a rung on the ladder. If you move from VMs to containers, that's a rung on the ladder. If you move from no container orchestration or custom orchestration to Kubernetes, that's a rung on the ladder. If you move from long-lived servers to self-hosted functions as a service, that's a rung on the ladder. But there's always a rung above you, and you should never stop climbing. One thing a ladder doesn't convey is that it's not linear. There's not always, there's not a strict progression here. There's not always a better when you're making choices. If you have VMs on-prem, is it better to move to containers and while you're staying on-prem or to move to VMs in the public cloud? There's not a clear, decisive answer there. And so I've thought about, multiple paths leading up a mountain. But one thing I like about the ladder is that it can be infinite, right? There's no mountaintop. There's no eventual stopping, right? I love Lambda, but I'm always looking for ways to deliver my code that can help me better focus on business value. Like serverless is a state of mind. It's about how you make decisions, not what your choices are. Like that's really the fundamental thing. Every decision is made with constraints. But if you know the right direction, you can choose the choice, the option that's most closely aligned with the right direction, and then you're climbing a rung on that ladder. So how do you adopt this mindset? How do you make serverless choices? So again, always, always, always remember that technology is not the point. You are hired to deliver technology, but that technology is not the point. At iRobot, visual navigation is part of our core intellectual property, right? We have a big team that works on it. But you don't see it in our marketing materials because our customers don't care that we've solved visual navigation for unstructured environments that's robust to drastic changes in lighting, right? That's a hard problem, and we're good at it. But it only matters because it allows us to clean more effectively and better understand the user's home environment. And that's what we market, right? That effective cleaning and understanding the user's home. Because that's what has value, and because that has such high value and the technology serves it, we consider that really important IP to us. The technology on its own is awesome, it's great, it's fun, but it's not the point. And similarly, code is not the point, right? I'll repeat this, what Charity said, that code is a liability, right? Just like the table stakes product features that I mentioned earlier, code can at best do exactly what you intend it to do, right? It can't, exactly, right? Bugs, it's always gonna have bugs and it's never gonna do exactly, and that's only losing you points. Like with that visual navigation, right? The intellectual property that's so important is the algorithms behind it. Our implementation is always going to be imperfect. And this is a cultural shift, understanding that code is not the point, that code is a liability. Technology has been hard for a very long time. It's taken clever people to create value with technology. And we've been in that space for so long that we've started to think that the cleverness is inherent and good, right? It's like we've spent so long crafting Swiss watches that we've failed to recognize the advent of the quartz Casio. And we impugn it because it lacks elegance, forgetting that it tells time more accurately. And what we want is to take that cleverness and stop applying it to technology problems and start applying it to business problems. So take all of the intelligence that a developer has and apply it more directly in service of what the business is trying to do. And when you're writing code, you're solving technology problems. And so this is why configuration is your friend. I think a lot of developers look down on configuration as like not real programming. There's like an idolatry of coding today, right? We've been told that software is eating the world, and we've mistranslated that as coding is eating the world. We've come to believe that developers are the most important part of an organization, and that our sense of productivity is the only thing that matters. We want to feel in the zone, and coding really hooks into that, right? I think we're all familiar with how that works. And developers start to think that anything that gets in the way of that must be bad. But we've lost any sense of whether being in the zone is actually delivering value faster than some other method. And this is, right, the days of programming can save you hours of configuration. It feels better when you're coding, right? You feel, connected to exactly what you're doing. Configuration often feels more frustrating. But in the end, if you accomplish the task faster and better, your feeling of productivity, your feeling of being in the zone does not matter. You are just wasting time at that point. And part of this is that constraints are good. Removing options can help you focus. Obviously, not all constraints are beneficial, but in general, the ability to do anything comes at the cost of it taking longer to do one thing in particular. So guardrails may chafe, but you're faster than if you had to constantly watch the edge. And in this way, serverless is about minimalism, right? We're removing distractions. And so Marie Kondo is big now, and the same advice applies, right? Find the components of your stack that don't spark joy. And to go back to the coding thing, right? It's not exactly joy, it's value. Because what may bring you joy may not be the thing that's bringing value. And you should be really introspective about that. Also, like this, be afraid of the enormity of the possible. Possibilities carry with them hidden complexities. For any technology, one of my primary evaluation metrics is how much capability it has beyond the task that I'm applying it to. And that's not the immediate task, but what I'm planning on doing with that particular technology. Because when there's a lot of extra space, there's unnecessary complexity in it that you have to learn about and that you have to deal with, right? So people tout Kubernetes as a single tool that can accomplish any cloud need. And that's true, it can, pretty much. But if everything is possible, anything is possible. For a given task, Kubernetes can go wrong because you haven't accounted for the way that it acts in situations that are unrelated to what you're trying to do. And then on the other hand, when you look at serverless, say on your platform, there's a service that you could use to accomplish the task that you're trying to do. And it gets you like 80% of the way. And you look and there's a third-party provider that has an offering that's like exactly what you need. But there's hidden complexities in there. Okay, you pull that in. What are operations going to look like for that third-party provider, and how do you integrate it with what you're already doing? What does the auth look like when all of the services that are in your current application now need a new system to support a new system that this provider uses, right? And that can be worth it, but you have to trade that off with the feature set that you're gaining. And then this is one that I'm really, I think is the hardest part of serverless and the most important. That one of the reasons that people don't like serverless is because they feel out of control, because you're handing control over to a third party for, if you're fully serverless, the bulk of your application. And it's really stressful. When there's an outage, there's nothing you can do to remediate the provider's outage. You still have work to do because you need to make sure that your system is responding as best it can in the face of that outage. And you'll think, oh, if I was running my own Kafka cluster, I could fix this. I could find the issue. And so then you feel that you'd move off of Kinesis, right? And that might be true. You could find that issue. You could debug it. But you should remember two things. First and foremost, it would be a distraction from what you're trying to do. But more than that, you would be worse at running it, right? Sure, you'd have more control, but it's not what you're primarily tasked with doing. Whereas that service provider, it is their purpose in life to be good at that service. They have economies of scale that you don't, right? You would have more and worse incidents, even though you would have more control in remediating them. And so moving past this, I could always build it myself attitude, accepting that other teams, other companies have expertise that you don't have yourself or in-house is a difficult part of this process, but one of the most important things to gain. So Jared Short recently tweeted this brilliant set of guidelines for choosing technology. So in order, if the platform has it, use it. When you stay within the ecosystem, you're removing so many possibilities from the equation that it's almost always worth it to choose that as number one. Now, and again, like I said, that's sometimes a trade-off. You accept something slightly less to stay there. Now, if you can't get it on the platform, buy it. This is standard serverless stuff so far. But if you think you can't buy exactly what you need, can you rethink your requirements for what you're doing to fit what you can buy? And pay a lot of attention to this because it's really important. It gets to the heart of time to market. You have something you think is valuable and you want to ship it. But it's better to ship something near to that you can get out faster than to build the exact thing you think is valuable, ship it later, and find out either way you're going to find out that you were wrong in some way. But if you build it yourself, now it's taken longer and you have ownership now. So the next iteration on that feature is going to take longer. And that's hogging resources that you could apply to more features beyond that. So there's also this flowchart, which if you're greenfield, this is sort of an iRobot flowchart. We do it this way. But the point in the decision box is even when you're not serverless, can you go back to the requirements and ask for a tweak that will allow you to deliver something faster or better, both now and in the future, right? You can do that even if it's not serverless. And finally, if you have to build it, own it. And this is not something I'll go into deeply, but the idea here is that if it's something that can't be found anywhere else, turn it into a differentiator. And this isn't everything you've built, try and turn into a differentiator, right? It's anything that you couldn't do through those first steps. If you were building a greenfield serverless implementation of the application you have, what are the things that you would have to build and turn those things into differentiators? Because no one else is doing it. So fundamentally, you want to find your part of the business value. What is your technology work in service of? And maybe you're far removed from user-facing product. You may only be contributing a small slice to that value, but you can find it and you can focus on it. You can start by focusing on the value you're delivering directly and make sure that anything that's distracting you from that, you're trying to get rid of. And then start to trace the value chain from there. What is that team delivering? And make sure all your decisions are oriented around the value that you're creating. Make serverless choices. And remember that you're not the tool. For any value that you're creating, automate the creation of that value. If you manage build servers, right, try to make them self-service. So what you're delivering is not the builds themselves, but the build tooling so that teams can deliver the builds themselves. And I love this quote from Jess Frizzell, but you can also turn it around. Automate yourself out of a job and keep demanding more jobs. So to sum up here, serverless is about focus. And always remember that technology is not the point. Basically never the point. Find your part of the business value and then start making serverless choices. Thanks.